America promotes the notion that hard work alone levels the playing field, that opportunities are distributed equally, and that where you live is merely a question of choosing. However, the data presents a different picture. One in which geography subtly determines who is allowed entry, who is ignored, and who must pay the highest price in order to live happily. Moving to the incorrect location is more than just inconvenient for African Americans. It may result in worse schools, stagnant professions, worse health results, and an ongoing struggle against systems that were never designed to function fairly. I looked closely at living in America beyond the catchphrases, relocation hype, and slick real estate marketing on Brian's virtual travel. I revealed trends that most people seldom look at, where Black people and families are repeatedly harmed by the intersections of racial injustice, limited economic possibilities, unequal educational systems, and restricted access to healthcare. These are not isolated issues or unique occurrences. These are recurring patterns that subtly influence the standard of living in whole areas. Using data on who succeeds, who suffers, and who falls behind, this video analyzes 10 states that Black people should never relocate to. It explains why discussions about the states where Black people are migrating are becoming more widespread. Why are there so many questions about whether states are unsuitable for Black people to reside in? And why choosing a new location now requires more than just looking for cheaper housing or better weather. Certain locations offer opportunities and cultural richness, but they also bring discrimination, decreased mobility, and long-term instability. The countdown ahead reveals the truth that most relocation counsel ignores, cutting through narratives. It is factual, serious, and purposefully awkward, with just the right amount of sarcasm to maintain objectivity. Keep watching till the very end because context is important. After that, let me know in the comments how this fits your observations. Subscribe to my channel and stay tuned in if you're looking for information rather than fantasy. Michigan is number 10. Detroit bustle. Pride in the Great Lakes. A state that used assembly lines and steel engines to create the middle class in America. On the surface, Michigan continues to market itself as a tale of redemption. However, zooming out and then zooming in reveals a much less encouraging picture, particularly for Black workers who are attempting to establish stability rather than just make it through the next round of layoffs. Even while the state's overall unemployment rate appears to be manageable, recent labor statistics has placed Michigan among states with extremely high Black unemployment during specific periods. This disparity is significant because Black workers are frequently the first to suffer and the last to recover when the economy slows, interest rates increase, or global demand changes. It's not a coincidence. Decades of labor market statistics support this pattern, which is further supported by the distribution of opportunities around the state. The car industry and allied sectors continue to play a major role in Michigan's economy. The state breathes easier when the auto industry is doing well. Job losses spread quickly when it shrinks, even a little. Not everyone is affected equally by automation, EV transitions, factory retooling, and offshoring. Employees without insider networks or specialized credentials are the first to feel the pressure. That unpredictability swiftly turns into risk for Black families moving without a firm employment offer. And there's geography. In Michigan, opportunities are not distributed equally. It's really concentrated. There is growth in a few metro areas. While underfunded schools, outdated infrastructure, and a lack of employment opportunities plague many neighborhoods with a majority of Black residents, crossing one city border can open doors to opportunities. You might be locked out of another if you cross it. Upward mobility is more dependent on where you land than on how hard you work. Additionally, housing does not offer the safety net that individuals anticipate. When you take into account factors like property tax pressure, insurance costs, aging housing stock, and sluggish appreciation in some neighborhoods, lower home prices in some places may seem appealing. Building wealth isn't usually a result of owning a home. Sometimes it just entails covering upkeep expenses in places where values remain unchanged. Another layer is added by healthcare access. Because of regional healthcare inequities in Michigan, certain zip codes may have easier access to excellent treatment than others, and job instability frequently results in insecure insurance. Stress is increased by this gap, particularly for families that are managing long-term plans or chronic problems. Michigan is harsh if you don't have any leverage, but it's not unlivable. Black families may find themselves in a neutral position while the state continues to change course due to skills that don't correspond with expanding sectors, reliance on a single industry, or the assumption that recovery narratives apply equally. Before packing boxes, consider whether your salary would be sufficient if the market changed tomorrow. Or would someone ask you to wait it out first? Wisconsin is number 9. Clean streets, cheese curds, and that trustworthy, wholesome Midwestern image. Wisconsin positions itself as peaceful, reasonably priced, and family-friendly. A place where it should be easier to raise children. However, when the postcard layer is removed, the schooling data begins to present a far less reassuring picture, particularly for Black families attempting to provide their kids with a genuine opportunity for upward mobility. Wisconsin has consistently been listed as one of the worst states for racial equality in education in numerous reviews of Wallet Hub-style studies. That is not an imprecise charge. It manifests as quantifiable gaps. There are frequently significant racial disparities in test scores, graduation rates, special education placement, and access to advanced curriculum. To put it simply, depending on who they are and where they live, children can attend schools that are only a few miles apart and encounter two entirely different systems. This discrepancy doesn't remain theoretical for long for Black households with children. It manifests as widening rather than narrowing attainment inequalities. Discipline rules that are applied inconsistently and enrichment or gifted programs that seem strangely unattainable. In the end, parents have to put in more effort, advocate more, document more, and navigate systems that appear to be made for children of someone else. It is exacerbated by geography. In Wisconsin, opportunities are very location dependent. While some districts struggle year after year with little growth, others fare better than the state averages. The problem is that educational quality and house affordability don't always coincide. Families are forced to choose between affordability and educational access since areas with better school performance frequently have greater entry barriers. Furthermore, it goes beyond K-12. Pipelines for higher education exhibit comparable trends. Competition for scholarships, placement, and long-term professional networks is more difficult for students from under-resourced districts. Because education is more than simply grades, that ripple effect is important. It concerns who is quietly ignored, who is encouraged, and who receives early exposure. Additionally, the employment market in Wisconsin does not automatically make up for those gaps. If schooling determines the course, unequal results may restrict future entry to higher-paying professions. Families who expect schools to serve as equalizers frequently discover the reverse. Schools are exacerbating existing divisions. This does not imply that Black families in Wisconsin cannot be successful. Many people do. However, success frequently takes careful planning, examining data at the district level, locating schools with established support programs, and verifying that the particular metro region outperforms rather than follows the statewide trend. On the surface, Wisconsin appears to be peaceful, but peace doesn't always equate to justice. Before you make the move, ask yourself the difficult question. Are the procedures in place meant to support your children, or are they merely meant to control them? Tennessee is number 8. Tennessee is the only state that offers personable, reasonably priced living. Growing cities, music history, and low taxation. It has a laid-back, friendly, and promising atmosphere, particularly if you're attempting to get away from expensive coastal living. However, Tennessee presents a well-known issue when you go past the marketing and begin analyzing how the systems really work. Until a payment from real life arrives, the lifestyle appears to be inexpensive. The fact that Tennessee is still one of the states without Medicaid expansion may seem insignificant until you consider how much it will cost your family. This move creates a coverage gap that disproportionately impacts middle-class and lower-class workers, categories where Black families are overrepresented, according to health policy tracking. In actuality, that signifies something straightforward. Even if you work, pay your rent, and support the economy, you may still find it difficult to pay for regular health care. For families juggling childcare and health care at the same time, that gap becomes cruel. The low taxes don't affect daycare costs. Because home appears to be inexpensive on Zillow, pediatric appointments do not become less expensive. A single unforeseen medical problem might make the low cost of living seem like the reason my savings have already been depleted. Particularly if the health benefits offered by your job are inadequate or costly. Another layer is added by employment. Businesses have been drawn to Tennessee, but wage growth hasn't always kept up with rising prices in rapidly expanding metropolitan areas. Certain industries have a large number of jobs, yet many of them pay poorly to moderately and offer few benefits. That's all well and good until rent increases, groceries skyrocket, and health insurance rates steal what appears to be disposable income. Education also doesn't make things easier. The quality of public schools varies significantly not only by district but also by county. While some zip codes struggle with underfunding and overcrowding, others may have good services and resources. That entails more than just looking up school ratings for Black families with children. You must comprehend how long-term results are shaped by financing and policy decisions made at the county level. Tennessee is not antagonistic. Simply put, it is structurally indifferent. If you have leverage, solid employer benefits, consistent income growth, and a clear grasp of where opportunity truly resides, the state will function well for you. Without it, families may be caught in a vicious cycle where expenses grow more quickly than support networks. The threat is not immediately apparent. South Carolina is number 7. Historic streets, palm trees, the slow-paced draw of the South, and coastal beauty. South Carolina is skilled at promoting the ideal. It appears to be a place where life should be simpler on paper. Lower costs, warm weather, and communities that pride themselves on tradition. However, the picture becomes much more complex when you go past the tourism pamphlets and start analyzing how institutions really work, particularly for Black families. Data on healthcare access consistently reveals that South Carolina is one of the states that has not extended Medicaid. States with fewer coverage alternatives not only save money but also increase racial disparities in healthcare, according to health policy tracking. Treatment delays become commonplace, preventive care is neglected, and treatable disorders subtly worsen when fewer people are able to obtain inexpensive insurance. These repercussions are not distributed equally. Practically speaking, fewer options result from restricted access to healthcare. A minor problem that could have been resolved with early action ends up requiring an ER visit. It takes longer to schedule appointments with specialists. There are fewer and farther-flung hospitals, especially outside of big cities. Distance and availability are stressors rather than annoyances for families dealing with long-term illnesses or elderly family members. That burden is not entirely relieved by employment. Although employment in South Carolina is growing, most of it is concentrated in entry-level or lower-paying jobs, particularly in manufacturing, logistics, and services. Opportunities for advancement do exist, but they are limited and frequently include traversing unofficial, sometimes inaccessible networks. Stable healthcare is still dependent on job benefits, which may not be robust in the first place, if there is little upward mobility. The gap is widened by geography. Modern facilities and growing industries can be found in several places. Others deal with inadequate specialty care, staffing difficulties, and hospital closures. Because of this unequal distribution, your health results are influenced by where you live in addition to your commute. These discrepancies tend to reinforce rather than address previous patterns of underinvestment for Black populations. South Carolina doesn't publicly display its difficulties. Before something goes wrong, life can seem peaceful, amiable, and controllable. The safety nets that many people believe to be in place aren't always present when it does. An immediate burden is the risk. It's a subtle vulnerability. It's worthwhile to inquire before moving. Does the system around you grow or shrink if your family grows, your work plateaus, or your health needs change? In South Carolina, the answer frequently hinges more on access than on effort. Georgia is number 6. Peach State has a powerful brand. Atlanta is home to a thriving Black middle class, culture, and opportunities. Georgia appears to be moving forward from the outside. Growth is shown by corporate relocations, film funding, new construction, and national attention. However, there is a catch to that increase. Additionally, Black families' experiences can quickly shift once they leave the city limits. Georgia appears on major policy trackers as a Medicaid holdout and is frequently cited in relation to a healthcare coverage gap. On the map, that disparity is not uniformly visible. Access may seem sufficient in some areas of Metro Atlanta. Specialists, large hospitals, and employer-sponsored insurance alternatives are all accessible. The system rapidly thins out after an hour or two of driving outside those hubs. Lengthier wait times, fewer doctors, and a greater distance between you and care that ought to be standard. Because relocation seldom stays inside a single zip code, this unequal access is important. People are pushed outward by family demands, employment, and the cost of housing. Access to rural healthcare becomes a major issue as you get farther from major cities, making simple medical needs into logistical planning tasks. Delays occur with preventive care. Long drives are necessary for specialist visits. Because proximity matters, emergencies become more distressing. Another layer is added by employment trends. Although there are plenty career options in Atlanta, commuting are difficult and competition is fierce. Due to rising housing costs close to employment centers, many families are forced to pick between time and affordability. Family life, child care arrangements, and mental capacity are all negatively impacted by long journeys. Healthcare access is even more reliant on employer benefits outside of metro areas, where employment opportunities are limited and incomes frequently plateau. The similar division is seen in education. In Georgia, there are significant district-level differences in school quality, not simply between cities and suburbs. Underfunded classrooms and well-funded programs can be divided by a single line. This difference means that homework doesn't end at the kitchen table for Black families with kids. It includes investigating zoning maps, transfer regulations, and long-term consequences related to your residence. Georgia is not a trap. The state has two speeds. The experience can be good if you come prepared with resources, flexibility, and the capacity to remain anchored close to opportunity hotspots. The support networks don't always follow you if you are forced to leave due to financial constraints or changes in your career. The countdown is halfway over. For more educational information, please hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell if you are enjoying the video thus far. Let's resume. Florida is number 5. Palm trees, sunshine, and the prospect of a simpler existence. Florida is adept at self-promotion. Warm weather all year round, no state income tax, and a constant flow of immigrants seeking freedom, affordability, and a new beginning. However, Florida manages a high-stakes balancing act behind the beach reels and postcards. And the balance swings in the wrong direction more quickly than anticipated for a large number of black families and seniors. Florida continues to be a non-Medicaid expansion state, a decision that subtly affects day-to-day living in ways that most relocation guides ignore. Gaps in coverage don't appear in headlines. They manifest as increased out-of-pocket expenses, fewer provider options, and postponed doctor appointments. Navigating healthcare can feel more like a maze with unexpected costs at every turn if you don't have a premium employer plan. Retirees are particularly affected by this reality. Florida markets itself as retirement-friendly, but access to reasonably priced healthcare doesn't always match the branding. Prescription drug costs, growing medical expenses, and insufficient coverage support all conflict with fixed incomes. The situation is not much better for working families. The majority of jobs in Florida are in the service, tourism, and hospitality sectors, which sometimes have erratic schedules and meager benefits. While bills remain the same, income may appear respectable during peak season and then decrease when demand slows. Insurance and housing add to the strain. In many areas of the state, rent has skyrocketed, and the cost of auto and homeowners insurance has increased to the point where newcomers are unprepared. On paper, a move that seemed cost-effective could rapidly become a monthly burden. When needs increase more quickly than earnings, saving money becomes more difficult. Access to healthcare varies greatly by county as well. Hospitals and specialists are available in major metropolitan regions, but possibilities become less plentiful outside of those locations. When emergencies occur or continuous care becomes a part of everyday life, that unequal access is important. Wait times, provider shortages, and distance are not inconveniences. They exacerbate stress. Florida isn't hostile, but it may be harsh if your health or financial circumstances change. Those with steady year-round income and robust insurance coverage benefit most from the state. Families may feel trapped without that safety net because they are too committed to leave but must constantly adapt to growing expenses and inadequate safety nets. Ask the awkward question before you chase the sunshine. Does Florida offer you room to breathe if your income declines or your health needs increase, or does it expect you to manage on your own while the rent keeps going up? Texas is number 4. In Texas, everything is larger. Expectations, ambition, sprawl, and paychecks. The state markets itself as a place of opportunity where growth never ceases, taxes remain low, and hard work is rewarded. To be fair, there are opportunities available in Texas, particularly in the fields of construction, energy, technology, and logistics. However, there is a contradiction that particularly affects black families behind the growth story. Even if you are making all the right financial decisions, instability could still be just one disaster away. According to several policy and news trackers, Texas continues to be a non-Medicaid expansion state and frequently appears in reports for extremely high uninsured rates. That combination is more than a statistic. It influences day-to-day existence. Preventive care is delayed. Regular examinations turn into optional math tasks. Small health problems are neglected until they escalate into costly crises. Contrary to popular belief, coverage gaps do not discriminate based on income. This is when the mystique of Texas breaks down. You can feel exposed even if you make a respectable, often very respectable, salary. Employer health plans may be costly, restricted, or associated with high-stress, long-hour jobs. The minimal tax benefit doesn't feel like much of a safety net when you miss work, move jobs, or have a medical emergency. Insurance and property taxes put further strain on everything. Although Texas does not impose a state income tax, property taxes are high in many areas, and insurance premiums have been rising. At first sight, owning a home seems reasonable, but when the annual payments arrive, expectations are adjusted. Your income tax savings may subtly and typically unexpectedly resurface somewhere else. Access to healthcare varies greatly by region. World-class hospitals and specialists can be found in major metropolitan areas, but once you leave those centers, things quickly change. Rural and smaller cities may have fewer options, longer commutes, and fewer providers. For families dealing with long-term illnesses, aging parents, or childcare requirements related to health access, this is important. Even employment doesn't make things easier. The economy of Texas is fragmented. While certain metro areas prosper, others stagnate. Additionally, relocating in order to save money may require giving up opportunities for greater commutes, longer commutes, fewer career ladders, and less benefits. These trade-offs often compound rather than balance each other out for Black households. Living in Texas isn't all that horrible. It's simply a state of enormous responsibility. The system makes the assumption that you will fill in the gaps, prepare for emergencies, and deal with shocks on your own. Alabama comes in third. Quiet communities, slower pace, and reasonably priced houses. Alabama is frequently promoted as a state where living feels simpler and your money goes farther. On the surface, that appears to be correct. However, Alabama exhibits a recognizable pattern when you look past the low-rent headlines and begin analyzing how the institutions actually work, particularly for Black families. Without access, affordability can turn into a trap of its own. Data on healthcare access makes it evident that Alabama is one of the states that has not embraced Medicaid expansion. This decision results in reduced coverage alternatives and increased uninsured rates, which disproportionately affect communities of color. Here, healthcare is more than simply an expense. It all comes down to availability, location, and whether or not your work has good insurance. The pinch comes fast if you don't get a job with good employer-sponsored benefits. You start putting off routine care. Travel and preparation are necessary for specialist visits. Healthcare that is preventive becomes a luxury rather than a need. Months of meticulous planning can be destroyed by a single medical problem, particularly for families attempting to establish stability from the bottom up. Another source of stress is employment. Alabama's economy is primarily dependent on jobs in the manufacturing, logistics, and service sectors, which can create jobs but frequently don't offer strong benefits or steady pay increases. While there are good chances in some places, many jobs have a short lifespan. Financial breathing room vanishes if salaries don't increase in tandem with even moderate living expenses. More than most people realize, geography is important. Access to hospitals varies greatly by area. While some towns have easy access to hospitals, others must travel great distances to receive basic medical treatment. Not only is that distance inconvenient, but it also alters results. Being close can mean the difference between early treatment and emergency care for Black families dealing with chronic illnesses, pregnancy, or elderly family members. Affordability of housing might also be deceptive. Wealth building is not necessarily correlated with lower pricing. In some places, owning a property does not always equate to long-term financial security due to low appreciation, little infrastructure investment, and stagnant earnings. Even though you might pay less, you're still making less money and frequently get less in return. Alabama isn't outwardly antagonistic. It is constrained structurally. People who enter with leverage, steady income, robust benefits, and a firm awareness of which regions genuinely offer upward mobility are best served by the state. Without them, families may find that they save money on rent but pay more for vulnerability, worry, and travel. Ask the most important question before doing. Does the system catch you when something goes wrong at work or in your health, or does it discreetly stand aside and let you deal with the fallout on your own? Louisiana is number 2. Here, culture is deeply ingrained. Louisiana fiercely embraces its identity, which is integrated into daily life via music, cuisine, history, and resiliency. However, the reality underlying the culture can be harsh when it comes to creating a stable, healthy future, particularly for Black women and families. In this state, celebration and disaster frequently mix, and the mechanisms designed to keep people safe don't always work when they're most needed. Access problems and healthcare deserts have been a major factor in Louisiana's severe maternal mortality concerns, which have been regularly brought to light in reporting and health policy studies. This is important because, depending on your zip code, pregnancy and childbirth shouldn't feel like high-risk situations. However, results are still shaped by overcrowded hospitals, restricted access to prenatal care, and unequal insurance coverage, particularly for Black women who already face greater risks across the country. Disparities not only emerge but also widen when health care systems are under stress. Regular examinations are postponed. Referrals to specialists take longer. The default becomes emergency care rather than prevention. For families, this means decisions based on availability rather than quality and stress on top of stress. The system can be detrimental even if it isn't overtly antagonistic. It simply has to be stretched to the limit. Everything is made more intense by geography. In Louisiana, access to healthcare is frequently parish-specific. While some regions struggle with provider shortages and significant care travel distances, others have good networks and amenities. Families are forced to schedule their lives around appointments, drives, and wait lists due to this unequal distribution. Those gaps can be hazardous and draining for people with chronic illnesses or expectant mothers. The impact is not always mitigated by employment. Access to insurance is largely reliant on where and with whom you work, as many positions in Louisiana are in industries with uneven coverage or few benefits. Families are left navigating a patchwork of options that don't always cover what's needed in the absence of strong employer-sponsored coverage. There are psychological and bodily costs in addition to monetary ones. The problem is made worse by economic difficulties. Many places have lower wages than the national average, which makes it more difficult to cover medical expenses. There is affordable housing, but when healthcare becomes unreliable, savings quickly vanish. When one incident can ruin years of meticulous preparation, stability seems brittle. Mississippi is number 1. At this point, the discussion becomes uncomfortable and ceases to be abstract. Mississippi is more than just another inexpensive place to move. Black families bear a disproportionate share of the state's severe mother and newborn health crises and low health outcomes, which are frequently reported nationally. That isn't an opinion. Major media outlets that monitor what happens when systems repeatedly fail the same populations have reported this reality. At the very times when access is most crucial, those figures result in fewer specialists, longer travel times for care, and increased risk. Planning is necessary for routine appointments. Instead of providing regular medical care, prenatal care may seem like a logistical burden. Managing chronic illnesses requires juggling coverage, availability, and distance. The margin for error quickly decreases for families with long-term goals. Mississippi has extremely unequal access to healthcare. While hospitals and providers are accessible in some places, others have restricted services, shortages, or closures. Expectant mothers are experiencing genuine concern as OB/GYN access, which is already limited nationwide, is increasingly more scarce here. The gap isn't usually filled by insurance, particularly for families with weak work benefits. Emergencies are more frequent when prophylaxis is difficult to obtain. The similar pattern is reflected in education. District-wise, school quality varies greatly, frequently reflecting geography and revenue rather than potential. This means that opportunities for Black families may depend on limits rather than hard work. One educational system provides pathways and resources. Another finds it difficult to satisfy necessities. Instead than concentrating on milestones, parents wind up navigating maps. These difficulties are not entirely offset by employment. The depth of the employment market is restricted, salary growth may stagnate, and possibilities for progression are limited outside of a few stronger places. Building financial reserves that could normally compensate for inadequate public systems is made more difficult by this combination. Until opportunity inequalities, healthcare, and education start adding invisible costs, lower housing expenses appear appealing. Mississippi doesn't lack resilience, culture, or community. Black households are consistently protected by inadequate infrastructure. The burden does not go away when states depend on individuals to adjust rather than making systemic changes. It is transmitted. The question to consider before settling in Mississippi is whether you should have to, not if you can live. Stay put if this breakdown changed your perspective on moving. Join the discussion by subscribing to the channel. Because where you reside shouldn't be a secret factor in determining how difficult life becomes.